Arthur could see patches of light bouncing along the walls from a distance, and immediately went stealthily, lest he should frighten the night visitors ahead of time. An abandoned clinic on the outskirts always attracted teenagers, and running after them accompanied by menacing shouts was tedious and useless. Light-footed boys and girls instantly broke the distance and fearlessly jumped into the windowless frames. And tellingly, none of them had ever been injured during Arthur's time as a security guard, although senior colleagues said that they had pulled a corpse or two from under collapsed stairs and from empty elevator shafts. Remembering the layout of the offices in the East Wing, Arthur grinned. So it is. The next pilgrimage to the office of Larissa Chernopolsky, a doctor and a psychopath. It was too attractive for teenagers. Then why do such adventurers come for? Moving noiselessly to the turn in the corridor, Arthur crouched down, hidden by a ledge in the wall, and listened to the quiet conversation. It was just he had expected. Someone was talking about the doctor's exploits in a voice that trembled with barely suppressed excitement. Why is it strange that the therapist killed? So what if it's not a surgeon? As if only surgeons can kill. You know what she was like? She was the one everyone trusts. She could approach anyone somehow. She advised all sorts of things. The narrator paused to take a sip from the bottle and continued. When some old woman comes to see her, oh, she says, here I have a side string, and here my hand is numb to the heat. And Larissa will talk to her, listen to her about pension, listen to her about her bonehead grandson. And then she tells her grandmother, there is, they say, a folk remedy. You old lady drink in the morning. Well, I don't know. Well, let's say have a glass of kerosene, or a tablespoon. It's that my grandmother started drinking. She was poisoning slowly and was dying. And after all, who will think that it's the therapist who will advise such crap? Larissa herself will still cry. What are these fools doing? Who put them up to it? Arthur realized that it was time to act. Soon the uninvited guests will get tired of standing in the middle of the echoing corridor, and they will go further to wander around the building. Smiling angrily, the guard scuttled up the stairs. Crouching down by the chipped steps, he waited until the voices in the corridor had stopped, then took a metal-framed flashlight from his pocket and tapped it on the floor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with a measured step, as if someone was walking from the top floor. Immediately, the expected question was asked. Did you hear that? It seems that the narrator, who recently tried to frighten friends with stories about Larissa the killer, scared himself the most. The voice trembled noticeably, and Arthur almost burst out laughing, imagining the white face of the stalker. He even had to bite his wrist to keep his temper. As if someone walked through in high heels, no? After a short pause, Arthur tapped again with a flashlight, and immediately grabbed the only remaining leaf of the door to the corridor and slammed it against the jamb. The girl screamed. One of the guys cursed, and judging by the sound, dropped a glass bottle on the floor. And then Arthur made the final move, not allowing the teens to return the composure lost for a moment. He took a breath and began to laugh shrilly and screechy, imitating a witch's laugh from a horror movie. After that, all three of them screamed. Without thinking, they rushed to the opposite end of the corridor, to the windows. Fortunately, the office of the famous small-town Dr. Killer was on the second floor. Before his victims could recover, Arthur ran after them, stamping his boots loudly on the floor and squeaking incoherent phrases. When he reached the window, all he could make out were three figures moving rapidly away from the abandoned clinic through the acacia bushes. The guard laughed again, this time for real in his normal voice, thrusting his hands into the pockets of his uniform trousers. He sent a flashlight with a broken glass that one of the teenagers had dropped flying across the corridor, and whistled a merry tune as he headed back towards the stairs. But he couldn't reach it. Pausing in mid-stride with one foot raised for another long stride, Arthur stared at the corridor and the slowly fading spots of color before his eyes. Spots left by a lamp that flared up for a moment and then went out in a round shade. The same lamp that doctors use to summon patients to their office. Arthur swallowed hard and put his foot down on the floor. So, the guy turned his head, looking around. The building was silent, as usual. Only the bushes, recently disturbed by fleeing teenagers, rustled in the wind, but that was on the street. Damn, breathed Arthur, remembering that the old building has been without electricity for many years. I kicked the light myself, so it's probably blinking. The guard straightened his shoulders, suddenly amused, and still tried to quicken his pace, not run, just go a little faster than usual. He wasn't afraid of that strange blinking, really. The flashlight just blinked when some of the contacts in it closed, and the lamp flared again, flooding the corridor with white light. It went out and flashed again, briefly, 3 times in a row. As happens when a doctor in the office loses his temper and hits the button struggling to draw the attention of patients. Arthur froze, looking fearfully at the door of the office number 24, the same one in which Larissa the killer, the psychopathic therapist, once conducted the reception of patients. Celebrity Grachevska. Crouching down, the guard tried to run quickly down the corridor, hands clasped to his chest, whispering prayers. But the dead light that splashed the walls against pinned him to the spot. He was about to cry when a voice came from the office, quite an ordinary female voice, even in some ways pleasant, despite the note of slight irritation. Next, come in, come in, come in. Arthur whimpered, wiping his nose on the sleeve of his uniform jacket like a child. It was impossible to go to the office, but for some reason it became impossible not to go. Straightening up for his full height and even brushing the dust from his clothes, the guy headed for the door. He held out his hand, and his fingers almost switched as he touched the metal handle. A single tear rolled down his unshaved cheek and dripped onto his jacket. Arthur pushed the door open. He immediately recognized the woman sitting in the office. She's the one who the news trumpeted for several months in a row, from small newspapers to federal channels. A doctor who has ruined dozens of lives for no reason, shot during the arrest at the office. "Well, come in already," the woman in the white coat shouted. Arthur stepped inside and froze in the doorway, speechless. Outside the study window, birds were chirping merrily. Bright sunlight flooded the room, glinting on the glass doors of cabinets. Through the smell of dust and medical alcohol, there was a faint sweet smell of rot, or perhaps some exotic perfume. "Arthur Camarino's, right?" The woman's voice broke the gloom. At least one of them. The office remained where it was, bathed in bright sunlight. "Well, sit down." Larissa the killer's hand swung in the air, pointing at a creaking chair. The guard couldn't help noticing the woman's neat manicure, which matched her low-key makeup. "I had some teenagers having an appointment, but they, I understand, are not in front of the office." The doctor paused, her chin resting on her clasped fingers, and Arthur shifted uneasily in his chair. "Well, the guy cleared his throat, drove them away." "Okay, fine." The therapist sighed and shuffled the papers scattered on the table. "So I'll take you in their place now. And why did you need to send the guys away?" "Well, I'm a security guard, aren't I?" The further the conversation went, the less real his life seemed to Arthur. He drove the guys away because he's a security guard. "But they have a doctor's appointment, right?" "To what other doctor? Because he guards an abandoned building." "But if the building is abandoned, where did this bright office come from? And why is a doctor who died a few years ago sitting here as if nothing had happened?" The boy put his head in his hands and hunched over, his elbows on his knees. Everything was so shaky. "Does your head hurt?" The woman in the white coat asked sympathetically. No. Well, what are you complaining about? Well, Arthur's voice was muffled. I'm not complaining about anything. The doctor threw up her hands, leaning back in her chair. How's that? Didn't you complain about your work? The boy looked up at the doctor in surprise. Thoughts in his head were confused, but a clue thrown by Larissa the killer suddenly obscured them all. Arthur brushed a hand through suddenly numb lips and muttered, Well, I quit the university in St. Petersburg in order to, said the doctor, in order to take care of my mom. She is sick right now. Larissa the killer nodded understandingly, encouraging the guy to continue the story. That's why I had to find a job. You know, you're going to be here for a while. Well, yes, I at first thought it would be different. I planned to return to St. Petersburg, get a degree, buy an apartment there, go to work. The guard hesitated, looking at the floor and twisting a button on the sleeve of his uniform jacket. The boy's eyes filled with tears. He wasn't going to continue, but the doctor stimulated him again. Arthur, let's be serious. With the doctor as in a confession, tell everything to the end. I thought my mom was fast. So what? And what's wrong, Arthur? Well, the guy held his breath, as if about to jump into cold water, and blurted out, She'll die. He suddenly burst into tears, smearing snot and tears on his cheeks. That's not what I meant. This, of course, is good. Understand me too. She's lying there, not serving herself. I come home from work and immediately for the duck. And then it starts wash, feed, clean up. And I'm 23 years old, by the way. Do you want to go for a walk? The woman asked knowingly and suddenly stroked the back of Arthur's head. The guard flinched, then relaxed. The doctor's fingers were warm and soft. Her touch was really comforting. He wiped his eyes hastily and turned to his companion. I want you, the boy whispered. And you want a pretty girlfriend, don't you? And a decent job, car, apartment? Arthur nodded, feeling ready to burst into tears again. When he realized again that he was missing from spending the best years of his life with his mother, he felt a bitterness that he couldn't even put into words. Don't worry, Larissa cooed, still stroking the back of his head. That is all, of course, difficult, but there is nothing that medicine can't handle. And she smiled, broadly and sincerely, and somehow Arthur immediately believed that this was the case, that medicine will help, anyway. You have a classic case, actually. Larissa took her hand away from the back of Arthur's head, and he barely restrained himself from rushing after her, begging for a tenderness like a dog. But the doctor was already writing something in a medical card which she pulled up on the table, creaking with a cheap pen in a transparent case. You, Arthur, she continued without looking up from the paper, you took too much on yourself. Well-intentioned, but it takes at least two, don't you agree? One works, the other takes care of the bedridden mother. So the load is distributed approximately equally. Sometimes you can change. The guy couldn't help but chuckle loudly. The disappointment was too great. I understand. Only I don't have money for a nurse, and I have no relatives left besides my mother. Who do you think I should invite to help? Larissa smiled again, and putting down her pen, looked at Arthur the way parents look at babies, measuring adult problems with their children's measure. I told you there is nothing here that medicine can't handle. Medicine, not economics or sociology. Arthur shrugged, still not understanding. Larissa sighed. Her hands slid under the table, and she groped briefly in the narrow space between the tabletop and the nightstand. The doctor's face lit up with joy as she drew out a scalpel, brand new, brightly shining in the afternoon sun. Right there, the doctor turned the instrument over in her hand, showing Arthur its perfect shape. That's what we're going to work with. The guard shivered. Echoes of some strange memory of the corridor of an abandoned clinic, flooded with the white light of a warning lamp, flashed in the brain, causing a fit of anxiety, but then disappeared, swept away by a soft voice. "We need, in fact, 2 Arthurs, don't we?" The boy nodded uncertainly, accepting the instrument. The handle was surprisingly comfortable. The metal still held the warmth of Larissa's hand, and Arthur couldn't help but smile. "Well, The guy looked uncertainly at the woman in the dressing gown. "I recommend cutting along," she whispered confidentially. And Arthur slashed his stomach from top to bottom, ripping through his jacket and t-shirt. To his surprise, the incision was completely dry, and not a single drop of blood came out. There was no pain either, just a slight tugging sensation at the very bottom of the wound. The guard glanced at the doctor, who nodded encouragingly. "Keep on." And Arthur kept on. His hands flashed up and down, slicing through skin, fat, and muscle. There was no blood, there was no pain, there was nothing but a sense of elation, of release, and the hot whisper of the therapist, leaning right over Arthur. So, let's." And Arthur did. He cut and cut, sometimes with smooth, long strokes, and sometimes with short, sharp strokes. The wound was getting deeper and deeper, so that the boy even had to hold the cut flesh with his fingers to reach the blade to new and new layers of his body. It seemed to him for a moment that he had almost reached his goal. The hole in his stomach would have been through in a little more time, and it remained quite a bit for 2 Arthurs. The guard turned to Larissa to brag about his progress and froze, staring at the woman uncomprehendingly. She was covered in blood. The skull had an irregular shape, and the guy immediately realized that this was the result of a bullet hitting the therapist's head. The doctor killer looked at the guy with her blearily dead eyes and smiled. The world blinked as the illusion disappeared. The shock of pain was so intense that it took Arthur a moment to realize what had happened. He was suddenly back on duty. He sat with a shard of window glass clenched tightly in his fist. The guard only glanced down once to see his guts, like a slowly unwinding rope, crawling from a huge hole in his stomach down to his knees. And his heart stopped. The guy was found in the morning, sitting in the same position, with an expression of infinite surprise on his face.